Good afternoon, welcome to St David's. My name's Mark, and I've had the privilege of curating the show at the Historical Society. I'm delighted that we've got we've got 2 afternoons of tours of some of the churches that are featured in the show. And we're grateful to the rector and wardens from St David's who are here, who've opened up the building. Thank you very much for that. And of course, it's a real pleasure to have Rob Quigley with us here, who's the architect, and also David Priest, who's also an architect and a member of the congregation here, who was instrumental in the church being built. So before I hand over to them, I just want to mention that I hope everyone can take one of these sheets there at the back, just on the right of the baptistry there, because there are 4 churches featured and open for us this afternoon. This is the only one where we're fortunate to have the architect in attendance, but there are 3 others, and you'll see they're listed on here. I don't miss St Mark's Methodist Church. It looks like a shed from the outside, but inside it's absolutely magnificent. So they're listed on here, so I invite you to pop round to them, and they're open, and we can just have a look at those buildings, which we've all driven past lots of times and never been in, so this is a chance to go in. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rob and David, and we'll be fairly free-form. Please chip in with any questions or comments you have, and I'm sure we'll be on the move to appreciate the building in the round. I might give this to you first, David. David.
I apologize for the feedback. We'll try to get that corrected. Yes, my name is David Priest. I am an architect here locally, and I was a member of the church before all of this started. And in 1991, there was a building over on the site, over on this side of the site, that was originally constructed as a social hall, and they put pews in it and a pipe organ, and all of a sudden it became a church, right, over the years, and everybody was comfortable with it. And we have, in fact, Jane is here. She was a birth member of the church. So, and in 1991, a young man from a couple blocks away came over and set the building on fire. So we woke up one morning and the building had been gutted. Interestingly, the straw cross at the back did not burn. So that's our relic from the old church. So we had to embark on a process, and that process, we formed a building committee. I was chosen as chair of the building committee, and we went on a search for an architect. We interviewed 4 architects of 4 very different styles, some of them who were specialized in church architecture, and the near unanimous, there was one person who might not have chosen Rob Quigley as his first choice, but Rob was his second choice, and this committee was from age 19 to 80 something, so Rob was a clear favorite for the style and the vision that he presented. So then we embarked on a design process. We did not. We specifically asked him, do not come in with a design. We want this to be a parish-led process, and that's what it was. And Rob was great at workshops and listening to our ideas, taking surveys, taking the results of the surveys in. And as a result of the survey, he said, well, here's what you want. You want a traditional church that's also modern. You want a church that's open to the neighborhood, but also separate from the neighborhood. And this went down a list of about 10 different things. And he said, this is a perfect job. So he was really excited about that challenge. And so you can see that what we have here is a result of that, and is both and. So the church also was designed as a backdrop for the different seasons of the liturgical year. So, we're in a summer season now, but if you come back at Christmas, if you come back at Easter, it looks different. If you come back in Lent, it looks much more somber. So that also is a great success in the church, in the design. I would also mention that, as you may be able to tell, it's a very good acoustical space too. And we do have musical performers who want to come and use our space, or once they learn about our space, that they come and they want to use it. So we have had some concerts here as well. So a very happy result for St. David's Church.
Thank you. I don't think this building would be the same if David wasn't involved. He really was such a central player in organizing the effort and interpreting me to the congregation. He's able to speak lay language and architectural language and bridge that gap. It made my life much easier. And it was just I think back, this was 30 years ago, right, that we did this. I think back, and it was just so many wonderful memories. I was just really fortunate to be able to be involved in this project. I do want to thank Reverend Hargraves for his explanation and interpretation of this building in his book. I haven't told him this yet, but it is one of the most accurate and I think profound descriptions of this building that has been done. I've gotten gun shy over the many years when I talk to somebody who's, even if they are sophisticated in architecture, what you say never kind of comes out right when it's written. And that was not true here. You really nailed it, and thank you very much for that. And that's not to say that that's the only thing in this book worthwhile, so I hope you all have that book. There's a lot of things to talk about here. Maybe I'll start with just the context. This idea of how do you put a modern, very, very large building in a neighborhood that's single-family houses. And that's a delicate procedure because it's a special place. It's a sacred space. It's not a house. And it needs to have that identity. But also, it needs not to be arrogant. It needs not to be belligerent in relationship to the very fine scale of all the houses around here. And so that was our intent. And you are the judges as to whether we were successful or not. But the idea was to have an internal courtyard that could be a sacred place, that would be a quiet place in the tradition of churches over the centuries, yet have entrances that are very subtle and domestic in scale from three different sides. And so that's how you enter the building, as opposed to what you might do, which is have a grand ceremonial entrance to a very impressive church. So it's a different attitude towards, and a more subtle attitude towards the issue of context. The thing that interested me most, actually, when we were designing this, was that there was a conversation, a global conversation at the time about the nature of sacred spaces. And that traditionally, sacred spaces had been rectangles of some form with an altar and a priest at the head of it. And then the congregation was sort of formally subservient, focused on that. And then its most elaborate versions were the cruciform plans of the medieval churches, where they layered side aisles on the side, but it was still that same basic idea. And the conversation was, well, that the sacred space ought to be more communal. It ought to be about the community, about the parish, about the worshipers, as opposed to focusing on that single item. And there were some experiments that have gone on. Some preceded the conversation, like Gill's church in downtown. What was that? Yeah. where it was more like an auditorium. It was a square with a podium on the corner there, which is a very radical departure from how sacred spaces were made. And there were subsequent experiments with this auditorium idea that I studied, and most of them, in my mind, lost something of the spiritual quality of the original ones. Yes, they took the emphasis off the podium, but they didn't really replace it with anything, and it sort of took away that kind of quality that you look for in a church. The other thing that was experimented with, an even more radical idea, was a church in the round, like a theater in the round, where the altar and the podium were in the middle and people sat on all sides. And this, to me, it was just too much of a theater and not enough of a sacred space. So here we tried something different. And to me, the plan is the most innovative part of the whole process. And that is that it's a simple square on the hard walls that you see all around you. But then layered inside of that square, rigid square, and it needs to be fairly rigid, by the way, because of cost constraints. But inside of that, we layered this round circle. It's not really a circle, more of an undulating form that softens everything, and it creates a layering. So you're in a space within a space is the idea. And to me, that helps with this notion of making sacred spaces. And it's more communal that way. And so you speak from the side, not on axis, not on the center. So, and that creates a more communal kind of environment. But there's still an orientation. It still is an axial idea in relation or out of respect for the tradition of sacred architecture over the centuries. The light, as you can see, the brightest light is behind you there. And at certain times of the day, approximately when services might be held, the skylight actually creates patterns and things that streak across that are moving slowly during the liturgy. And then the other thing we did was turn the roof the wrong way. So as you can see, the peaked roof ought to be going this way. The ridge ought to be going this way in most churches you have ever been in. But by turning it sideways, it took the emphasis again off of this and created more of a communal feeling that we're all in this together, that we're one, that there's a unity. So that was kind of the core discussion that created this space. And then, of course, in all my buildings, I'm concerned about the quality of light. And you can create really dramatic spaces by making them dark and just having a little bit of light. But then again, you can't see faces, and it sacrifices the communal quality of the spiritual experience. And so here the light level is brought up, but the primary sources of light are on the edges, and a softer light coming from above. But we spent a lot of time tuning in models. We didn't have computers in those days, but we had models that we worked with, physical models, to help us tune the light properly. There's also the idea of procession in spiritual architecture that I think is very, very important. When you just walk into a space off the street or off a courtyard even, it's a one-dimensional experience. And in the best spiritual architecture, it's a rich, multi-dimensional experience. And so you start by entering into this large courtyard. You may have gone through this courtyard into the larger courtyard. So it's a choreography of procession. And from the main courtyard, then you come in here to this space that has the baptismal, and it's a very low ceiling with as hard a surface as I could make so that it would be acoustically belligerent. So that the sound as you walk in, you can hear yourself. If you have hard shoes, you can actually hear yourself walk in. And you become aware of yourself is the idea. And that then acts as a prelude to entering the softer acoustics of the main space here. Materials. We believe that the materials could be very simple and very affordable and still have a wonderful building. And there were some things we found out. For instance, we found that we could use this brick pattern, which is inspired by Episcopal churches in England, at about the same cost as doing a concrete floor and some nice flooring on top of it. In fact, it may have been cheaper. And in my fantasy, over the years, this would undulate because there's nothing under this. It's right on the sand, it's on the dirt. So theoretically, they would do a bad enough job that as you walked over it, it would eventually undulate and there would actually be patterns of circulation that would be embedded into the floor. So my biggest disappointment is they did too good a job. And it's as flat now as the day it was built. But in another couple of 100 years, I have hopes. So those were the main things. David alluded to this process that we had to create architects call it the program, or the kind of guiding message as to what should be built, what people really want to see. And I'm a big advocate of that kind of dialogue. One of the problems with modern architecture over the years was that some architects, Frank Lloyd Wright comes to mind, wrote incredibly egotistical and, in my mind, inappropriate statements about the architect as some kind of semi-god that would bestow his otherworldly talent on you lucky people that get to use the architect's building. Unfortunately, that was taught in architecture schools. And so there was a kind of backlash against that in the beginning in the 70s about how people who use a building ought to have a say in what the building is, and that they ought to be the driving force. And that it always happened without the architect. Without the architect, that happens naturally. But also without the architect, the buildings weren't very good. So you had bad buildings that were kind of what people wanted, that worked well, and you had really spectacular buildings that didn't work, that were monuments to someone's ego, some one person's ego. So the process then is very, very important. That's the way to get around that. And in all of our buildings, we use that process. And what happens there is that we're educated. The architect is educated about value systems that aren't my value systems. They're your value systems. And so out of that, we coalesce that into a series of paradoxes. I think you can describe architecture, define architecture as a successful resolution of paradoxes. And so David mentioned a couple of them, but there were 5 or 6 of these. And again, you're the judges as to whether these were achieved or not. There's no such thing as a perfect score. But one was inviting, welcoming, and open to the neighborhood, but at the same time private and secluded, which David mentioned. Secondly, a joyous place of vibrant social interaction, but a quiet place for private introspection and peaceful prayer. And to that end, by the way, we did not build pews for the last 2 rows. You can see those are pull-in chairs. And so there is a level of flexibility in this space. So if you